morning, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Good afternoon for the people in the middle part of the United States, and good evening to the people around the world. And today we're going to have a very interesting topic to discuss why there's this conflict going on in the Middle East. There's a big movement happening, which I have a poll on LinkedIn, the Pod TV LinkedIn poll right now, which has very interesting results. It deals with a subject matter that we're going to talk about today's show called Brics, which is an alliance between Brazil, you'll love these people, Russia, our favorite friend, India, are they our friend? China, what are they doing here? And South Africa. Okay, but that's not just the problem. Just like the SEC, if you follow college football, they are doing an expansion program. So Brics, which is an alliance, looks to be an alliance against the West, is adding more recruits. And here they are. How about adding Argentina to the team? Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran. Now, these are all our friends, right? Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So it looks like this is expanding. According to the latest poll I have on the Pod TV, 51% say it's a problem, 39% or 30% or so say it isn't, and then 25% say, what is Brics? So we're here to let people know what Brics is. And with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. I'm sure you have some opinions since you introduced me to this grand old alliance called Brics. Should we be concerned about it, or should Americans put their heads in the sand on this one?
Yes, I think we need to be concerned about it, but let's first talk about what it is and what it's evolving to be. Brics was formed 10 to 15 years ago, started out with Brazil, Russia, India, China, then South Africa joined, giving you the acronym Brics. But as you mentioned properly, Nick, that there's a number of countries that are set to join on January 1, 2024. Those are Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Argentina. Now, let's put this in perspective. Today, Brics represents 27% of the land mass on Earth, 42% of the Earth's population, and 33% of the GDP on a purchasing power parity, and 22% of oil production. But post bringing these new countries on, these new 6 countries on, Brics will represent 41% of global oil production. That's an angle you really have to look at. As we've talked about many times before, there are 4 things that really takes to be a superpower: economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural. Clearly, Brics is about economic. There's no question about it. And they could end up trying to leverage their impact on the oil market. They're also trying to move away from the dollar, and they're talking about creating a separate currency that would be gold-backed. And obviously, there's a lot they could do to make sure that you end up having to buy oil in that new currency. I don't think the United States is going to lose reserve currency status, but we are going to lose market share because of a number of things going on, including our own fiscal and monetary irresponsibility. From a diplomatic standpoint, most of these countries are allied. I might reinforce that India is the head of the non-aligned movement in the United Nations, which is 70 to 80 countries. From a military standpoint, it's not as much of an issue. It's really more economic and diplomatic. At the same point in time, as we've talked about before, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, among others, are aligned against the United States militarily. And we're seeing some of that manifested, not just in Ukraine, but in the Middle East right now. And this is really not about a cultural issue other than they don't like the dominance by the Western nations. And they're looking for an alternative to the dominance by the Western nations. So, yeah, this is a serious issue, in particular with regard to the amount of the energy market that they will control effective January 1. And I'm looking forward to hearing from others and having a healthy debate about this.
And we're going to bring in the others, our panelists from around the United States and around the world. We'll bring in from the Mega Society member, Mr. Rick Rosner from Los Angeles has joined us. Up in the San Francisco area, we have Jim Eade, who's the head of the Eade Foundation. We're going to bring in Kim Calhoun, who's with the Pod TV network here in the Raleigh-Durham area. And Sasha Starr is joining us from Canada. So I guess we'll start with you, Kim, since you're right next to me. What are your thoughts on this Brics? I mean, it looks to me to be a hefty alliance, and if it stood just here, it is a contender for world dominance. And some of these people aren't our friends. It looks like Russia's not, but they're worse than the SEC. Look at their expansion. They plan on adding more countries to this BRIC alliance. So what are your thoughts on that? Realizing that on LinkedIn, which is usually a group of educated people, the Pod TV LinkedIn poll, 25% say the answer to this is, what is BRICS? So what are your thoughts on BRICS?
Well, I think that they are a very powerful alliance that have been gaining some traction. We've kind of diverted our attention to other things, which I think is a bad thing. I think we need to be paying attention, a very close attention to alliances like this and find out what are their real intentions. And I think David is right. Take a look at who they are and what they represent. Economically, they are probably the world's biggest holder of all of our oil and gas and energy resources. When I attend CIRA, that's, if you look at the map, that's what they contain. And what would happen if, they decide to go to war with us like everyone else is doing right now? That seems to be the next knee-jerk reaction of many people. The other thing that people haven't looked at is like China right now. There's a company called Syngenta, and I think that they're taking over our agriculture. I mean, they already own our pig farms here in the United States, our major pig farm. Syngenta is a huge farming company, actually owned by China. They own over 1,700 acres of land and still buying. And there have been questions by government officials, what do we do with them? I mean, they are researching our seeds. What are they doing with that research? Could it harm us or help us? So I think BRICS, we just need to delve in a little bit deeper and find out what their true intentions are.
Okay, we're going to dig over to our Mega Society member who joined us early from Los Angeles, Rick Rosner. Since you score like 1 out of a million on IQ tests, you're able to solve problems. It'll be this, Batman. Is this a problem? And do we?
Yeah, I mean, we compound our problem because we need to get the country pulling in the same direction, not have a third of the population believe in crazy stuff. We've never talked about the singularity, which is a thing that tech bros believe in, that the rate of technological change by the 2040s will essentially become infinite because of AI and related technologies. And that allows crappy countries to, like, it doesn't matter. Like, I've got this huge IQ. Doesn't frickin' matter because anybody with an iPhone can be as smart as I am just by using the apps properly. And same goes for these countries that, Russia is a sucky country, low life expectancy, bad GDP, a small population relative to some of the rest of the countries, only 160 million people. But Russia spends $30 million a year on propaganda that makes Western democracies crazier. And so social media propaganda. So technology in the hands of, all these, countries that were not leading makes them more powerful. And this is a terrible time for America to be divided and have incompetent government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with that, we're going to San Francisco right now, speaking of the people in the tech sector, and talk to Mr. Jim Eade, who lives up there. And what are they saying about that in the Bay Area, about BRICS?
Well, I think David set the stage correctly by saying this is an economic group consolidation. Much like OPEC was, much like the EU was, They're aligned for solving their common problems. And when you read what they wrote when they established BRIC before South Africa, it's for non-interference, equality, and mutual benefit. Now, what is so threatening about that? Why are we so threatened? It's because we're afraid of losing our dominance, our position of dominance in the world, and telling other countries what to do. What if we start thinking about cooperating and mutual benefit? Why is that something that's scary? Mutual benefit. Now, we talk about Russia and China as our enemies. Well, Russia invading the Ukraine was definitely an act of terrorism, in my opinion, anyways. And we have to oppose terrorists. We have to oppose terrorists whenever they manifest themselves. And, China has not yet done that. We still have trade with China. Why not continue trade? I believe in engagement. Brazil, Argentina, they're suffering. These populations are suffering. They aren't real threats right now. But if they have mutual benefit by establishing relations with other countries, they might be able to prosper. Now, why should that threaten the United States? Why aren't we for the global prosperity? Why aren't we in favor of countries like Egypt becoming a better country so its population doesn't suffer? Why is that threatening to us?
That's a good question. We'll throw it to our friend in Canada who used to live in the Ukraine, Sasha Starr, who also used to be part of the Soviet Union's army. So, what are your thoughts about what Jim said? Are we threatened by BRICS, or should we ignore it, Sasha?
BRICS is a very artificial organization that unites countries that have nothing in common between themselves. If you'll ask what Brazil has in common with South Africa, none, absolutely nothing. It's a bloc which was created by Russia, which goal is only single-handedly to hurt US anywhere, everywhere where it can't. This is the reason why it created the BRICS and now bringing all more countries which are helpless bystanders, like Argentina. Beside winning soccer world championship, what Argentina can do to dance their tanga or lambada until the morning? What else Argentina can do? Be realistic. What they are doing, they are useful idiots in the hands of Russia. China is playing very skillfully both sides. China, the more than anything else, they would love to have understanding with the United States. And I think it will happen rather soon, rather sooner than later. And then it would completely isolate Russia, and BRICS will be nothing but bunch of stationery and maybe a couple of telephone calls around the world. That's about it.
Okay, we'll go to our international hedge fund manager out of Australia and get a view from down under. So Shaquille, should we be concerned about BRICS? I notice you guys in Australia and you guys in Canada are not part of this wonderful mutually exclusive organization. What are your thoughts? What are you guys saying down under?
Well, before I answer that, because I actually want to respond directly to what Jim actually said, but I'm just going to quickly take a quick side note and just talk to Rick for a second. Rick, you said a few shows ago that you're Jewish. You're the only Jewish person that I'm aware of knowing who I haven't rung because I don't have your phone number. What happened out the front of the Sydney Opera House, which I know that you guys saw in the media, where there was a protest where they said, F the Jews, kill the Jews, gas the Jews. I don't know of a single Australian, I don't know of any Australian that supports that. As you know, half of my family are Muslim. None of my family support that. What's just happened is an absolute disgrace. What's happened is in Israel, and the support for it in Western countries blows my mind. I don't understand it. It is an absolute disgrace, and my heart goes out to you and the other 15 million Jewish people in the world.
Thank you.
It's absolutely horrific. And please don't think that Australia or the Muslim community are supporting this, because they're not. As to Jim's comments, I think it's a really interesting position because, when you've got 30% of the world's economy under sanction or embargo at the moment, what do you do? What do you expect the countries to do? And I think there's a tendency these days in the West, and especially in the Five Eyes nations of Australia, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia, to say we shouldn't interfere in those countries. And I hate to say this because I'm so anti-war. Maybe I should have been born in the 60s, be one of those hippies, right? I'm so anti-war. But I think we have to stand for what we stand for. Human rights has to be at the core of what we believe in and what we stand for. And the question is, when we see a human rights abuse, when we see something that we don't approve of, that we have agreed with internationally through the UN Declaration of Human Rights, through other United Nations things, when we say that we stand for liberal democracy, are we going to fight for it? And are we prepared to spend our money and even sometimes our lives to fight, or our children's lives, to fight for the freedom of others? I think we have to. And our reluctance to do that and to rely only on diplomacy, I think, is coming up short. And one of the reasons it's coming up short is because we're prepared to back it with military action. So, yeah, there's a lot of problems in the world. I think we need to start stepping up and saying, not on my watch. You will not do these inhumane things to other people on our watch. For the United States, geographically close to where you are, what's happening in the Southern American countries is terrible. I mean, Mexico has a bad reputation, but look at what's going on in all the other countries south of your border. The drug cartels, criminal cartels running the place. Do we just stand for that? Or do we just sit there and say, you know what, those people who want to get out of there, come to our country and we'll bring you into our country and incorporate you into our country, but we won't do anything about what's happening back in your country. No, I think that's wrong. We really have to start standing up and saying this is unacceptable and we will not tolerate it. And I know, Dave Walker, I know that puts an extra cost on the United States, but it's not a cost that should be borne by the United States alone. Just like when the United States supports the defense of Europe, the European countries should be financially contributing to that support. They absolutely should be. But unfortunately, the whole world has just relied on the United States. The United States has gotten jack of it and said, hey, look, we want to put our kids through college. We want to have what you have, Europe. We want to have healthcare. We want to be able to provide social services to our people. We're spending all of our money protecting you guys, and you guys are fraternizing with the enemy. Right? That's absolutely fair enough, but the sanctions and the embargoes aren't working. But as far as criticism of the Brics countries, I'll just say two things on this. One, as I've said many shows before, they're operating in their own interests. The Belt and Road Initiative from China, what a fantastic idea. That's something that we should be doing. But the second thing that I will say is when you see those countries doing those sorts of things, and you talk about a country like Saudi Arabia or the UAE or other countries that are beginning to flirt with the Brics countries, what we're really talking about is countries that we won't sanction trading with countries that we will sanction. Okay? They get an advantage to our detriment. And just last point, Jim, you talked about free trade. As you know, as the evil capitalist that I am, I absolutely, the libertarian, Milton Friedmanite capitalist that I am, I absolutely support free trade. However, I have long said that one of my criticisms of Milton Friedman's theory is if we live in the West and we have union rules that support a particular level of wages and conditions for our workers, and then we allow foreign companies not to abide by those conditions and to undercut us, not just because labor is cheaper, but because they're breaking those rules, we are putting ourselves at disadvantage. And the question is, do we put protectionist tariffs in, or do we do something about those countries? that is an issue that we need to deal with. But the bottom line is that we cannot allow other countries to not abide by the same playing rules that the rest of us have and then get an advantage over us because of it.
Yes, David.
Well, first, let me say, Shaquille, I like your shirt very much. Okay, and
It's a new one.
You
It's a
had,
new
you,
one.
had, you had a lot of provocative comments there. Several comments. One, having been chairman of the Audit Committee of the United Nations and being able to see the UN at work for 5 years firsthand, it is run by a bunch of diplomats. And the current arrangement for the Security Council is such that you can't expect the UN to do very much on things that really matter. In particular, in the case of Israel, there's strong anti-Israeli sentiments against the state of Israel in the UN. And the U.S. obviously is very much allied with Israel. But many of the other countries that are part of the UN are not. Plus, with every Security Council member being able to veto any particular action that's proposed, which includes Russia and China, then to the extent that things are happening in places like Ukraine or Israel or whatever else, the UN is further neutered. Thirdly, the UN has no army. It does have peacekeeping forces, but the way the peacekeeping forces work is countries will end up lending, for pay, I might add, they get paid, some of their military forces to the UN. They'll wear UN helmets or whatever, but, those are peacekeeping forces. In addition, I totally agree with you that the U.S., as the so-called leader of the West, quote unquote, okay, has an obligation to be able to intervene in appropriate circumstances in order to protect, in order to protect our national security, our allies' national security, and to fight autocracy and other things that are going on that hurt everybody. But the problem is that we tend to do way more than our fair share. In addition, let's take Ukraine as an example. I'm all for helping Ukraine, but we've done way more than our fair share. And now Biden's asking for $60 billion more for Ukraine, without having an end game as to where this thing's going to end. And so my view on that is, hey, let's help Ukraine, but let's use a little bit of incentives and say that what we'll do is it will match what the Europeans give. So you get on the Europeans to get off their keister and start doing a lot more, including countries like France, who talks a lot but doesn't do much. Okay, Italy, Germany's finally started stepping up. Oh, by the way, France is interested in being in participating in Brics. France is interested in participating in Brics. All right.
Why not?
Well, they're French. What are you expecting?
I understand. They want to have a big role, but it's a wanna. So the other thing is that there are a lot of things that are going on in the world right now where the U.S. doesn't have a treaty obligation. There's no treaty with Ukraine. Some senator on TV this morning, who I will not name to protect the guilty, said that we had a treaty with Ukraine. No, we don't. There's something called the Budapest Agreement, which is not a treaty, which Russia, the UK, and the US signed back in the early 90s so that Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons. And guess what? Needless to say, Russia didn't honor the bargain, but it invaded Ukraine. And what happened when Russia took over Crimea in 2014? The US did nothing. All right. So we don't have a treaty with Israel, although it's obviously our greatest ally in that region of the world. And we obviously want to do everything we can to protect Israel. We don't have a treaty with Taiwan. There's some people that say that we have a treaty with Taiwan. So I totally agree that BRICS is primarily about two things. It's about economics, and it's about trying to counter Western dominance. It's about those two things. But some of the members of BRICS want to do more than that. They want to counter the U.S. Economically, diplomatically, militarily, and culturally. And those are the ones that we need to be more concerned about. But I come back to where I started. When you control 41% of the world's oil production, that's where you got to look and say, what's the intent here?
David, sorry, Rick, can I just very quickly, sorry, I know you had your hand up, can I just very quickly say something? David, I absolutely agree with you on everything that you said about America brunting the financial cost. As a British citizen, a former European before we left, I totally agree with you. I think that's totally unfair. And I've always said that, and that's why I have such a love for the United States. And I don't understand, even upon Australians, why people have such a negative view towards America. Oh, America went over here and America went over there. But just as a quick side note, I just want to let you know that Kimberly Calhoun joined us last weekend on Saturday, where we had a referendum in Australia. We also had the New Zealand election. And I just like you to know that if you do Google your own name and see what your results are, and you happen to have a big increase in people Googling you from Australia and New Zealand, it's because of us, because we mentioned you very many times on the show. And we talked about no labels, and we talked about how great it would be if we actually had some no labels and some people of your caliber in our country or in our countries. So just in case you're wondering why there's been an increase in interest from Australia and New Zealand, that's the reason why on our election show.
Yep. Rick Rausner.
All right. So a lot of these countries are entrepreneurial dictatorships where the deal with their citizens is, you keep your nose clean, you shut up and you work, and we'll make you rich and you'll have a pretty decent life. But if you start agitating, we will smash you. And the NATO countries are all kind of pro-liberty and democracy. And so that's thing one. Thing two is the U.S. still has a bunch of habits, both good and bad, that stem from us owning the world after World War II. The rest of the world was in ruins, and the U.S. had some huge percentage of the world's manufacturing capacity. And we've been spoiled by our position of dominance and haven't come to terms, really how to buckle down and compete. And China just has to be patient. It reminds me of China reminds me of a supermodel who goes on a talk show and says, in middle school, I was geeky. They called me Skeletor. China is like that girl who in 9th grade is 6 feet tall and 105 pounds and no boobs. And it'll probably work out for that girl because she'll turn into a supermodel. China just has to wait, and they'll get most of what they want because they're technologically proficient, and they have 1.4 billion people under this dictatorship that gets them all kind of pushing for dominance.
Rick,
Well,
when
and
you
they have a
when you say
plan.
that the United States has exerted this dominance, has the United States just exerted it, or has it earned it? If we totally discount the military action of the United States in Europe, and we just talk about it from financial aspects, has the United States borrowed money and then invested that money in other countries around the world to support them? Why shouldn't the United States be in this powerful position, and why shouldn't the United States and its citizens reap the benefits of that? I'm an American, but I feel like I'm more patriotic about America's interests than most Americans.
We need to figure out how to continue to dominate, and we've lost some of that.
Yes, you should, because as the leader of the Western world and as the leader of the movement and the human heart's greatest desire of freedom, as the leader of those that push the ideals of liberal democracy, the United States, who doesn't act unilaterally, the United States acts with the support of every other liberal democracy on earth, especially the Five Eyes countries. Yes, you absolutely should demand that other countries acquiesce to the things that we tell them that they should be doing.
Can I jump in here? And then first,
Go, man.
China has something that we don't have. They have a
Corruption.
plan. They have a plan, and they're patient. But let me come back to what Shaquille said. The United States has intervened in European wars twice in the last 120 years and made the difference in both of those wars. At the end of World War II, the U.S. was 50% of global GDP. It had 70% plus of global manufacturing capability. We were it. But what did we do after World War II? We invested in Europe. We invested in Japan. We even invested in the countries that were our enemies during World War II in order to help them recover from the war, in order to promote economic development and opportunity. But what's happened is the United States has not recognized the reality that it's a new day today. Now we're about 24% of global GDP, so less than half. And that's on nominal dollars, not on purchasing power parity. China's already passed us on purchasing power parity. India is going to pass China by 2050, okay, in all likelihood. And so we are the leader, Shaquille, but leader doesn't mean that you get to dominate. And today we need alliances more than ever, because we have a number of challenges domestically that we've got to come to grips with, including the fact that our finances are stretched. And so, yes, we need to be recognized for what we've done, but we need to be able to also recognize the reality that today is not the same as World War II. We need a plan. We need alliances. We need to start executing, and we need to quit living for today and start helping to create a better tomorrow. And I'll leave it.
With due respect, Dave, why shouldn't we
Shaquille,
dominate?
come on. We've got other people with hands up. Come on.
Yeah, let's go to our
I've
alliance.
had my hand up for a while.
Nick, you ought to moderate.
We'll do
I
that.
realize that this is economic show. However, while we are discussing BRICS, and there are a lot of economics as well as other factors, I would like to remind everybody that in 90s, there were approximately the same time 2 books were published. One of Fukuyama, The End of History, and another one by Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations. Now, obviously, Fukuyama book is now being basically decimated on all fronts. All his ideas of globalism and no need of governments, all this happy large village where everybody loves each other and lives together with other in happiness. That's all being absolutely destroyed. Let's talk about Huntington, Clash of Civilization. That is becoming more and more a reality as we're moving further along. Now, it's almost 30 years since the book was published. Remember that G7 countries, these are all part of the Western civilization. All the BRICS and all these new countries, what they want to join BRICS, they are all parts of different civilizations, not European, Western, European, US civilization. So to preserve this civilization, both economically and militarily, the West have to be A, united, B, strong, and to lead the world, not just trying to patch things a little bit here, a little bit there, and so on. If you want to have this policy, you don't need $1 trillion war budget, military budget. All you need is maybe $50 billion just to make sure that you can defend against Canada and Mexico. That's all what you need. You have almost $1 trillion budget. Why? David, could you explain?
We do, because we have a disproportionate responsibility for global security, okay? But I will also tell you that there's a lot of money can be saved in our Pentagon budget. There's no doubt about that. It's a bloated bureaucracy, but Jim's had his...
Jim Ead, you're up, and then Jacoby.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is an economic discussion. And the military things, and I'll go back to the founding principles: non-interference, equality, mutual benefit. Now, why don't we have a global society? Why is it just Brics that's founded to do this? And I think the United States, France, everybody should be thinking about, why don't we join? Because non-interference, equality, and mutual benefit is in the world's best interest. And what we have to do is stop thinking about the past and how we may have come to the rescue of other countries and live in the present, where India is becoming this superpower. China is a superpower. And as David pointed out, in following World War II, we remade Japan and Germany. They became very viable economic forces in the world. So today's enemy can be tomorrow's friend, tomorrow's trading partner. If we look at this, just a moment, if we look at this as an economic interest and trade with each other and keep each other honest in these trade discussions, and it may, it gets very complicated in how you do that, but this is in our best interest as a country, as a people. And when we start working on a global economy, we have to also incorporate a global community. And we're just starting to talk about this and think about this. We're a long ways from it.
But Jim, I would respectfully suggest several things. Number one, just because they use certain words doesn't mean they're committed to those words. It's like politicians. Okay, they'll say one thing, but you know how you can tell when a politician's not telling the truth?
Their moving flips.
Okay. Secondly, and Megan Trainor did a good song about that. The second thing is you're talking about why the UN was created. The United Nations is a lot bigger than BRICS, okay? And so the UN was supposed to try to be able to help promote world peace, promote economic development and opportunity, fight poverty, help to be able to eradicate certain diseases. I mean, that's what the UN's all about. And the UN does some good work, but it is dysfunctional. It needs to be able to be revised, including the Security Council, to recognize the reality of today and tomorrow rather than based on post-World War II situations.
Well, with all due respect, Dave, what I'm suggesting is that BRICS is a sign of the new day, the new promise of the new day. The UN is a sign of the past. It is dysfunctional. Yes, it had all those promises. Yeah. And of course, yes, Russia is not telling the truth. There's no question about it. But why is Argentina suddenly our enemy? Come on.
They're not. No. BRICS. BRICS.
It's an economic situation. It's an economic organization. It's economic, like OPEC, like the EU.
It's economic
together. Trade with them.
It's economic, and to counter what they believe is a disproportionate influence by the United States and the West. I mean, Correct. That's what it is. It's not military. They're not enemies because they're a member Correct. Of that. And by the way, one of the things we got to think about, Jim and others, and I'll stop here. India is a wild card.
Yes.
India is going to have the largest population in the near future, okay, if not already, okay. India is growing. India is a democracy, the largest democracy. India is not going to ally with China militarily, okay. It's wanting to create its own influence, but India plays it both ways.
Sure.
They've got very close ties to Russia. And so they're going to be a particularly important force. I'll tell you somebody else who's going to be important economically and potentially militarily. Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
They're a wild card. Turkey's a wild card. Watch out. All right.
Jacoby, you're up.
So, Dave, this is why I enjoy talking to you. Sometimes it's great because I think I agree with a lot of what you say, and then it's good to hear from different perspectives. In terms of, because I completely agree that we don't have a plan, because I don't think that we're thinking future. No. We're not we're still stuck in the same archaic idea that we need this giant power, this blah 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 blah. And I think if we look globally economically, is it possible? I'll put the question to you. Is it possible, because of the shift in us being more of a service country or service-oriented country, less of a manufacturing, even though we're trying to bring manufacturing back, but that's going away to automation. How, in your perspective, can we economically begin to, I guess, not really dominate or even focus on, hey, we must be? How can we create a coalition around around future tech, similar to the way that I guess China and India are both pushing that future technology with AI? How can we as a country jump into that same boat and begin to build coalitions that way, which deal with the future technology and the future of the economy globally and not just in one area?
Well, I think there's no question that it's in our interest to do that as long as others want to do that too. You know, it's like a two-way street, right?
Mhm.
I think most Americans are for free trade, but they want fair trade. And not everybody wants, everybody wants something that's to their advantage. Okay. And so we got to get past that. The other thing that we're going to have to do in the United States that we have a real problem with is our K through 12 education system is in serious trouble. You know, I mean, if we're talking about wanting to compete in the future, we need to re-engineer our K through 12 education system. We also need to fundamentally reform our immigration system to recognize the new realities that we're in a global economic Olympics and that we have to compete. But as I'll come back to what I said before, I think the U.S. is a powerful country. It's an important country. It's a leader of the free world. But we need to have a plan. We need to have more partnerships. We need to try to get past this as we versus they, like the newest thing, the axis of evil. Okay. That's the new axis of evil, I don't think it's inevitable that we're going to have another World War III. I sure as hell don't want one. But we need to start focusing more on the future rather than the past.
Yeah. Rick Russell.
So the U.S. needs competent politicians. Our current political environment lets too many scuzzballs, idiots get elected.
Now, don't pat it. Don't pat it. Tell me exactly what you think.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Also,
Don't hold back.
like we need to counter 1/3 of the population being like swimming in nonsense, right-wing punditry, like the Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and Hannity. Those people all make $30 million and more a year, like spewing bullshit at the gullible. And it means we're anti-science and anti-public education at a time when it's more critical than ever that we be pro-science and education.
Well, I think you got to be a little careful, Rick. There are wing nuts on both sides.
Sure.
And there's a disproportionate number of wing nuts in Congress
And in the Republican Party in Congress.
So,
I think that's fair to say, Dave.
I'm an independent, so I'm an equal opportunity.
I'm an independent
speaker. I think
Right, so gerrymandering.
Well, I'm very independent.
Let's get back to economics. Let's get back to economics.
Republicans in the old
I wanna
days, when
ask
they weren't crazy
A
like
very bizarre
Economics.
question. I want to ask a very bizarre question. I'm just very curious as to why we're not invited to Brics. Is it because our acronym will throw their name off? I mean, why are we not getting involved with uniting with them to see what's really going on? Why have we been separated? Why aren't we either invited or butting our nose in and saying, hey, let us join? Why?
Because
US has to pay an entry fee of $5 trillion, and then it would be allowed to join.
Yes.
BRICS.
Sasha, don't tell them that. They'll end up passing
They'll ask for
legislation
it.
and they'll borrow another $5 trillion to do it. No, I just want to come back just a little bit, but very quickly to Jimmy and to Rick. Look, you guys are Californian. We know that you secretly have a crush on that Southern Belle, Marjorie Taylor.
Oh, you caught me. You caught me out.
I don't know what you have against her. No, I do want to very just quickly say to Dave, you make the comment, well, why should America be doing this? Well, who else should? And you don't
Oh,
do it
nobody
alone.
else.
You do it with everybody else. But to Jim, you make the comment about should we be neutral? And when you say we, you're referring to the
When
United
did I say
States.
that?
But should we? Well,
When
earlier
did I
you
say
said
it
should we
neutral?
interfere?
I never said neutral.
Well, you were talking about should we interfere. I'm misquoting you because it
Nope.
was a while ago now. You were talking about U.S. interference in other countries and should we be interfering in other countries? You made some reference of that.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Please don't assign motives and words
Okay.
to me that I.
Well,
did
as I
not
said,
say.
it was a while ago, so I may be misquoting you, and I apologize.
Yeah, I never advocated for neutrality.
Okay. Well, I again, for the fourth time, I apologize if I'm misquoting you. But the position that many Americans have that they shouldn't interfere in the domestic arrangements of other countries, I don't agree with that because I think that the United States should do that for the same reasons outlined earlier. Domestically, we interfere when we see women, for example, being abused, or when we see children being abused. When we see that happening in third world countries and developing countries, we should get involved. And we get criticized for it. And we get told, oh, we're colonizing. Or we get told that we're, interfering in domestic affairs or we're pushing our morality on other countries. Yeah, because that's what we all internationally agreed on. And that's exactly what we should be doing, in my opinion. And I know that sounds harsh, and I know that is something, and again, Jim, I'm sorry if I'm attributing those comments to you, but I think that's what we should be doing, actually, in the West. And it's not particularly a popular opinion right now, but I think that we should stand for what we believe in. I know the reasons.
There's nothing wrong with leading by example. No one's ever said anything about that. Lead by example.
I think it's more than just leading by example, actually. I think that we need to interfere with the affairs of other countries when they're doing things that we don't approve of. And let me just
invade Iraq because of their. Come on, Shaquille, you're not making sense now. We don't invade other countries to make them treat women better.
Absolutely, we should. Yep, I believe that we should. And
I'm not with you on that.
So my family,
and I'm not an isolationist, although there's a strong
that's
isolationist tendency in the United
States. So
my
family, my parents, my next generation up from me, moved to Australia because and to the UK because they wanted to have a better life, because they wanted to have freedoms and liberties that they didn't have in their home countries.
Exactly.
Okay?
So I'm
many immigrants do that. Now we sit there and we take those immigrants in, but we don't help them in their own countries. Now, in domestic affairs, if your next door neighbor, if you think that he's bashing his wife, you call the police and you interfere in his home. If you think that the person across the road is abusing their children, you call the police and you interfere with what's happening in their home. But for some reason, when it's happening in a different country, it's happening in a different country and they're abusing their women or they're abusing their children, we sit there and say, oh, baby, we shouldn't get involved. Absolutely, we should get involved. Because if we really believe what we say that we believe,
hold on a second, and Jim as well. I had a quick question for Shaquille, because there are countries that have some very strong views against the LGBTQI community, and I know that there are some in Africa and a number of other parts of the world. Am I hearing you correctly in thinking that we should interfere in those countries because they have different belief systems in those kind of areas, and they've definitely had some very strong Supreme Court decisions and some very in their version of Supreme Court, as well as some other strong decisions. So are you saying that we should interfere in those countries even though we might have different moral views than they do and everything along those lines? Because I know there are a number of countries, we can go even to some of the genital mutilations and definitely around some very strong LGBTQI thoughts and everything. So should we be interfering in those countries?
Yes, we should interfere. Yes, we should interfere when it comes to genital mutilation of babies. Yes, we should interfere when it comes to LGBTQ community members having atrocities pushed against them. Absolutely. What we shouldn't interfere on is what the right amount of the GDP should be spent on healthcare or education, or what the right amount of taxes should be. We should interfere on those issues. But when we're talking about human rights issues, absolutely we should interfere. We either interfere and say these are the ideals that we stand for, or we sit there and say we're absolute hypocrites. will tell you that we stand for these ideals.
That's
We'll sign
incorrect.
international
That's not a
agreements
correct choice.
saying that we
There are
stand for
other
these
choices,
ideals.
Shaquille.
We'll
You're not
force you to
you're not being
sign
fair.
those agreements, but
You're
then
not
when
being
you
fair.
break them, we'll just
All
sit
right,
there like
all
a
right.
bunch of pansies. and do
Dave,
nothing
David,
about it.
David,
That's ignorant.
Dave,
Ideally, what we should do is act globally through institutions that have a broad-based degree of support. Ideally, the United Nations would be much more engaged in the kinds of situations that you're talking about, Shaquille, with regard to human rights, with regard to economics, with regard to diplomacy, and even with regard to militarily. I mean, having a force that could be committed. I don't think it's appropriate for the United States to unilaterally exert itself, nor can we afford to. But I think we could reform and enhance the UN to make it more relevant, because I don't think it's very relevant right now. And that includes fundamentally changing the composition of the Security Council to recognize the reality of today and tomorrow, and to not give any country a veto right. No single country should have a veto right over what the UN does, including the United States.
Jacoby?
Yeah,
I was gonna. I mean, honestly, this is again where we agree again, Dave. Yeah, I mean, you cannot have one country try and unilaterally tell everybody else how they should act. So using the UN, bolstering it. On top of that, creating a coalition to talk about to work with these issues from women on the board, LGBTQ representation, all the inclusivity that you can have within that UN, and pushing that out there as it's working. And I think we don't give credit to where sanctions come into play, because to bring it back to the economic side, we should utilize those sanctions in those ways. That is your way of intervention, because you cannot militarily jump into another nation, because that's a war. So again, the best way, the only way through is economically and humanitarian aid, utilizing those economic levers to work through and get that aid for those LGBTQ who are being killed in Africa just because they're gay, or the women who are being abused in different areas across the globe and sold in sex trades, and the individuals within North Korea that are being tortured. I mean, there is a lot out there, and we need to work as a coalition, a global coalition, because we have to stop this isolationist idea and this ethnocentric idea that we know all. We have to work with global partners. We have to work with a coalition to get these things to work.
Can I get back to Kim's question?
We've been doing that for decades, and what we have right now is a bunch of countries that are forming the Brics alliance, because what we've done hasn't worked. We've put sanctions, we've put embargoes on them, and they've all joined together and formed a trading bloc.
So you're saying just to
continue
quit?
to do the same shit?
Hold on a second, Dave.
Let me jump in for a second, okay? First, let me get back to Kim's question. Kim says, why aren't we joining Brics? I don't think they want us, because one of the reasons that Brics was formed was to counter what they believed to be was the disproportionate influence of the United States and the West, okay? And one of the things that they don't like is economic sanctions, all right? I mean, several of these countries have economic sanctions imposed on them, all right? And they don't like the dominance of the U.S. dollar with regard to global trade, which is also one of the reasons why they're trying to develop support for a separate currency that might be a gold-backed currency. And I think where they're in the best position to try to make that happen is with regard to the energy markets, because after January 1, 2024, they will control 41% of oil production in the world.
Hey, Dave, just really quick, I know we're winding down, but one of the complaints that I've heard people saying, even from the Brics country, is this notion of we can't even get our own house in order and everything, because we've got a housing crisis. We've got a number of houses that are going up. I can speak of Durham, and I'm seeing all these houses that are going up, and they're not even at maximum capacity, and we have a homeless problem at the same time. And of course, we won't even talk about the penal system and what's going on with that as well. So I know that that's one of the complaints that the BRICS nations have. They're like, you need to get your own house in order before you can tell us what to do. And I
agree with that. I agree with that.
I want to address one thing, and that's why I asked that question. Is that's the questions we have to be asking ourselves. Why are we not part of that organization so that we can understand what their real intentions are, so that we can get our house in order to protect ourselves or to improve what we need to improve, because they are planning. They have their house in order. And right now, if they really wanted to, they could take over. So I asked that question on purpose, not just to be goofy, but to start setting into place what we need to be paying attention to.
But they're specifically against us, right? That's why we're not part of them.
That's
Specifically against us. We have sanctioned them and embargoed them. Sorry, Rick.
So in our current social media and niche media environment, the loudest voices are the craziest voices. I'm on Twitter or whatever you call it all day, and I'll tweet that Donald Trump molested my dog, which is and we're bombarded with a fire hose of this garbage all day. And in Congress, because of gerrymandering, the craziest candidate gets elected, because in a safe district that's safely Republican, safely Democratic, the primary determines who wins.
That's correct.
And it's the craziest, most extreme people who show up to vote in a primary. So you've got a bunch of people in Congress on both sides. Robert Menendez should be out. Matt Gaetz should be out. That George guy who took his donors' credit cards numbers and just ripped them off for 10, all should be out, but they're all protected, insulated by their media.
Well, one of the biggest jokes is the Senate and House Ethics Committee.
There was too many words
I wish
there.
I wasn't laughing. I wish I wasn't laughing.
Dave, there was too many works there. You should
It's
have
called an
said
oxymoron.
one of the biggest jokes is the Senate and House.
Oh, okay.
Just left it at that.
All right.
We definitely have a problem in our country, and that's one of the reasons why I support No Labels, because Travis, the person who's been watching us from Australia, even said it. We have to stop creating the divide at the top, where they have created the labels and they divide us and them. And we need to begin it by just getting people in office that have no labels. They have no party favors that they're giving to everyone, that they are joining together to make a better place for the United States, not for themselves or for their party. And I think that was a true show for us when they got rid of our House Speaker, because he wasn't for his party. I have issues with that.
Let me just say, as one of the national co-founders of No Labels, I support what you're saying. Today, the latest statistics I've seen, 48% are unaffiliated voters, including me. 27% are Democrat, 25% are Republican. Choice and competition is one of the foundations of our democracy. Check out nolabels.org, wherever you are, anywhere in the world.
Dave, can we bring you to Australia and make it nolabels.org.au? Can we bring you over here, please?
Nolabels.org, and we're out of time. We'll see you next week on Economics.
I had a good one.
I did too.
All right, Tony, next week.